So I will talk about equivalence and argumentation frameworks from a claim-centric perspective. And yeah, this is joint work with Ringo Baumann and Markus Ulbricht. And yeah, I will present you some kind of results which are very in line with what has been done already. And yeah, also some kind of quite new direction, so to say. Therefore, the subtitle Classical Results with Novel Ingredients. Okay, so equivalence is, as we all know, very well studied in several disciplines, most prominently logics, where one wants to ask whether two formulas are equivalent. And in knowledge representation and reasoning, instead of the formulas, we consider knowledge bases, and we want to know whether they have the same information. So here we have two knowledge bases, and we want to know whether they are equivalent. So this is, on the one hand, this yields insights about the knowledge bases, but it also helps to obtain a concise representation. Coming back to logic, here we have an example what could be meant with concise representation. So we have not A is assuming classical propositional logic equivalent to A, which is in this sense more concise and yeah can be yield more like smaller formulas. Okay, now in argumentation, instead of considering this raw knowledge bases, this information in this knowledge bases, we represent them in terms of arguments and attacks. And now instead of asking whether K1 is equivalent to K2, we can look at the argumentation frameworks and ask whether they are equivalent. And yeah, so what we want to do is we want to focus on conclusion-oriented non-monotonic reasoning formalisms. Examples are default logic. So we all know the famous Tweety example where, so in classical propositional logic, if you have a set of formulas and this set of formulas implies some formula phi, if you add another formula, then this doesn't change anything that the set of formulas still implies phi. This is not the case in default logic. We all know this famous Tweety example where it is kind of crucial to know if Tweety is a penguin, then it doesn't fly. And also another example would be logic programs or stable model semantics in logic programs. We have seen this in the talk of Matti, where we had this default negation. And here, Matti was also talking about the close connection to argumentation or abstract argumentation frameworks. Here, the crucial point is that, in fact, if we have these translations, we are not interested in the constructed arguments, but in the claims in the heads of the logic programs, which kind of could be are the claims of the arguments. So there's one unifying framework which captures this idea. These are claim-augmented argumentation frameworks. So for claim-augmented argumentation frameworks, we consider directed graphs which are labeled. So for directed graphs, Markus gave us already a nice introduction. Here we have that the nodes correspond to the abstract arguments, the arcs to the conflicts between the arguments. And now the new thing which comes are the labels, which are the claims of the arguments. Yeah, and instead of evaluating this framework in terms of arguments, so instead of asking which arguments are jointly accepted, we are now interested in which claims are jointly accepted. So is this claim C accepted in the given framework? And yeah, the crucial difference to abstract argumentation frameworks, claims can appear on several arguments. So here we could either accept C2, which is kind of unlikely because it is self-attacking, and also C1. So instead of considering standard argumentation semantics, we go to conclusion-focused argumentation semantics. So I'm going to talk about one semantics, namely stable semantics, but it comes with different versions. Stable semantics in abstract argumentation frameworks we have already seen them today. So a set is stable if it is conflict-free and attacks all other arguments. Here we have an example of a stable extension, A2 and C1, where A2 attacks everything which is not in this set. So we have here, can be checked, a unique stable extension given by these two arguments. Now, the first version, the first idea how to generalize this to claims is very straightforward. One evaluates the underlying argumentation framework and applies the claim function to the set of accepted arguments. So the stable claim set here would be the inherited stable claim set here is given by the claims of this argument, so A and C. And what does this mean? So a claim set S is said to be inherited stable or I stable if there's a conflict-free set of arguments having these claims that attacks all other arguments. Now, instead of taking this, of assuming that this set attacks all other arguments, we can also consider claim defeat. So instead of asking whether that this set of arguments should defeat or should attack all other arguments, we can simply require that an accepted set should defeat all other claims which are not accepted. So let me first explain what I mean by claim defeat. We say that a claim B is defeated if all arguments having these claims, this claim B are attacked. So here the set of arguments containing this, this argument A1 here defeats the claim B because okay, B appears only once, but this occurrence is attacked. Also A2 defeats this claim and C2. Okay, and now saying instead, we say that a claim set S is claim level stable or short CL stable if there's a conflict-free set of arguments with these claims that defeats all other claims. So instead of requiring that this claim set should, so this underlying set of arguments should attack all other arguments, here it is enough to defeat all other claims. And again, we have this the same stable claim set, having the claims AC, but now we have two realizations. So we have A1 and C1. So as we have seen before, the argument A1 defeats claim B, and we also have this other stable extension, which is also inherited with arguments A1, A2, and C1. Now, for those people in the audience who have already been working with claim-augmented argumentation frameworks, know that this is just one version of claim-level stable semantics. There is another one which is based on admissibility of the underlying set of arguments, which I won't consider in this talk. So let's consider this inherited stable semantics and the claim-level stable semantics based on conflict-freeness. Yeah, equivalence in argumentation. We say that two frameworks are ordinary equivalent with respect to a given semantics if they yield the same extensions. So we can have, so let's consider these two frameworks, F and G. The only difference here is that G misses this attack from A1 to A2. And if we want to know whether they are equivalent with respect to inherited stable semantics or claim level stable semantics, we see that this is the case in for both frameworks, for both semantics. They yield this unique claim set. Yeah, but what happens if I consider F and G, if I consider new information, what happens if, so are they still equivalent after information update? So what do we mean by information update? Intuitively, it can happen that in the underlying knowledge bases where we constructed F and G from, there is new information which is then encoded in new arguments, which are added to the existing frameworks. And now we see after information update, first claim level stable semantics still are equivalent. So we still have this first extension AC, but we also get a new one consisting of all claims. And here it's kind of crucial that we consider that we just require the underlying set to be conflict-free. And we see, because we see here that this set contains all possible claims. So it basically doesn't care about all the other arguments because it doesn't need to defeat any other claim. Yeah. Now for inherited stable semantics, we see that after information update, F and G are no longer equivalent. The reason is that, okay, here we have this extension, which is also stable on the underlying argumentation framework, but it can be checked that I cannot have a stable set which contains an argument for all claims in the other framework in G. Yeah, so we see there is an issue. So to sum up, we have that ordinary equivalence does not allow for this simultaneous expansion, so this incorporation of new information, which also means that it's not possible to replace equivalent subframeworks within a larger framework without changing the extensions. So this is a notion which is, something which is quite desirable. Usually in classical logics, this is possible. So we had this example before where I had not A is equivalent to A, and it is like we want that it is if we know the two formulas are equivalent, that we can in this case plug in A wherever we find not A. So this is considering ordinary equivalence in argumentation not possible. So here we have the central difference between monotonic and non-monotonic formalisms. Now, because we really want this property, so this is very desirable, we consider instead a stronger notion of equivalence. We say that F and G are strongly equivalent with respect to a given semantics if it is possible that for considering an arbitrary framework H, that after union, so that F union H yields the same extensions as G union H. So here we have these requirements more or less encoded in the definition. So this is a strengthening of ordinary equivalence to retain these desired properties of this classical equivalence notion. So this means that strong equivalence is expansion robust and allows for information update. And now I can replace strongly equivalent subframeworks within larger frameworks without changing the extensions. Yeah, this is not a notion we came up with, but it's a very well established concept in the KR community. I point to several strong equivalence results with respect for logic programs, but also for abstract argumentation frameworks and generalizations thereof. Now, in claim-augmented argumentation frameworks, there is one small issue which we have to deal with. Namely, they have to be compatible in a certain sense. So it can happen that an argument appears in two different frameworks in F and G, and it can happen that they have the same claim. And then it is, so we don't want the situation, so we exclude it from the definition. So here in claim-augmented argumentation, we consider ordinary strong equivalence just between compatible frameworks. Okay, so our contributions are, as a promised, classical results. So we consider ordinary equivalence and their dependencies between semantics. And also we provide characterizations results for strong equivalence via so-called semantics dependent kernels, which are sub-frameworks which arise after deleting or adding certain attacks. When studying this strong equivalence concept, we ran into certain issues, which I will talk later about it, but basically it's connected to the names of the arguments which are in claim-based argumentation secondary, so to say. So we introduce a novel equivalence concept based on an argument renaming function or an argument renaming. And yeah, we study also argument renaming in terms of ordinary and strong equivalence. And yeah, we investigate the computational complexity of all of these concepts. And in this talk, I will not talk about ordinary equivalence, but focus on strong and renaming equivalence. Okay, to strong equivalence, we focus on claim level stable semantics. So in order to introduce this kernel, what we had, let us first recall what happened already on Dung IF level. So it has been shown that two argumentation frameworks, abstract argumentation frameworks, are strongly equivalent with respect to each other, with respect to each other with respect to stable semantics if their stable kernels coincide. And the stable kernel is constructed by removing so-called inactive attacks. Yeah, I have an example here. So the inactive attacks are basically those attacks coming from self-attacking arguments. The underlying idea here is that such self-attacking arguments needs to be attacked anyway in a stable extension. They can never appear in a stable extension. And so I can neglect attacks that are outgoing attacks from self-attacking arguments. So let us consider our running examples, F and G. And forming the kernel of both, we see that they are not strongly equivalent according to this result, because the kernels are not syntactically equivalent. So yeah, they're not strongly equivalent with respect to stable semantics. Now, for claim level stable semantics, we have a certain relaxation, because it is the crucial point is that for arguments having the same claim, the only important thing is to check whether is it possible to accept both arguments. So here the direction of the attack between arguments with the same claim is not important. And it is not only the case that there must be some attack between them, but it can also happen. So also if an argument is a self-attacking argument, it is not possible to accept both A1 and A2. So therefore, I can treat them as if they would be conflicting. The reason here is that in claim level semantics, it is not important to accept, so it is just important to accept either one of A1 or A2 or to attack both of them. So here this is kind of related to so this comes from this conflict freeness of the underlying extension. Okay, so the stable kernel, the claim level stable kernel for this claim level stable semantics is constructed in two steps. So we first add all inactive attacks. This comes from the stable part. And second, for arguments having the same claim, we add attacks between them if the set is conflicting. And this, for those who know results for, so kernel results for Dung-style argumentation frameworks, this comes from, so it's similar, so this comes from the naive kernel, which where also attacks, the direction of the attacks is not of importance. So let's construct these kernels for these two frameworks by first adding the inactive attacks, and second, adding these attacks between arguments having the same claim. So we have here an attack, and also between those two arguments, we have this bidirectional attack. And then we see that these two kernels are in fact equivalent to each other, syntactically equivalent to each other, and therefore, so our main theorem here is that for any two compatible cuffs, we have that they are strongly equivalent to each other with respect to CL stable semantics, if and only if the kernel agree. So to sum up our characterization results for strong equivalence, we showed that two cuffs are strongly equivalent if they are, with respect to a given semantics, if the row-specific kernels coincide. Now, for inherited semantics, the kernels coincide with the corresponding kernels for the IF semantics. I've shown you this novel kernel, which characterizes conflict-free based admissible claim level semantics. And for the admissible based claim level semantics, we showed that the kernels for those coincides with the admissible kernels for Dunsthaler F frameworks. Okay, and yeah, this implies that deciding strong equivalence is tractable, because in order to decide whether two frameworks are equivalent, we just need to compute the kernels and to check whether they are the same. Okay, let me now give you two different frameworks at slightly different situations where we have F and G, and we want to know if they are strongly equivalent to each other. And here we see that they are in fact the same frameworks, but the names of the arguments are different. So we have the same attacks between the same arguments, but the only difference that is here that instead of A2, this argument here is called A1. And now the interesting part is that they are in fact not strongly equivalent to each other, which can be seen if I add a new argument, D1 here, having some claim D, which attacks C1. And if I add this attack to the argument having claim C1, this forces me to introduce in the framework G the argument C1, which is attacked by this novel argument D1. And it is not possible to also have this attack to the argument which would correspond to this one. So here I am forced to introduce this new argument, which of course leads to different stable extensions here in the inherited part, but this is also true for the claim level semantics. So although there are situations where the names of the arguments are for sure crucial, this might not be the case for all situations. So we can consider that F and G might represent the same knowledge base using different argument naming schemes. So also using the same instantiation procedure, we just could have used different arguments for this instantiation. And here it would really make sense to identify C1 and X5 and all other arguments with each other. So the thing here is that strong equivalent check, this check yields in a way unintuitive results if the argument names are not of importance. So our solution was that we wanted to consider strong equivalence up to renaming instead, where the argument names are, so to say, not fixed. So we introduced renaming strong equivalence, and in the way that we said that two frameworks are strongly equivalent to each other up to renaming, if there is a claim-preserving renaming function for the argument names in F, such that after applying this function to F, we have that F of F and G are strongly equivalent. And checking this, whether this holds for F and G in our example, it is, pretty easy to see. We have this claim-preserving renaming function by just taking the argument names of G and applying them to the corresponding arguments in F. Yeah, and the result, what we had here is that two cuffs are strongly equivalent up to renaming with respect to a given semantics, if and only if their semantic-specific kernels are isomorphic. Which so consider the two frameworks from before here. It was quite easy because of the way how I presented it, but in general it might be not that easy to check whether two directed graphs are isomorphic. So the complexity of deciding renaming strong equivalence then coincides with the complexity of the graph isomorphism problem, which is in NP but not known to be NP complete, although it is considered unlikely. Okay, to sum up, I presented you some of our results concerning different equivalence concept in claim-focused argumentation. I presented you this characterization results for like standard strong equivalence via semantics-dependent kernel. But I also showed you this, like our results for the renaming strong equivalence notion, which is characterized via this kernel isomorphism. This is an adequate generalization of strong equivalence if argument names do not matter. And although I didn't show it in this talk, but the complexity of deciding ordinary equivalence is in general, not for all semantics, one level higher in the polynomial hierarchy than for argumentation frameworks, which is not extremely surprising for claim-augmented argumentation frameworks, considering this additional level of claims. Okay, and I want to end this with some open questions, which are also related to structural argumentation. So based on our results, we were interested in which insights can be now extracted for structured argumentation. So considering like many instantiation procedures, argument names are not important. So we incorporated this consideration already in this work, but in our analysis, we neglected structural properties which are imposed by several instantiation procedures. And this would be an interesting direction for future research. And this, also related to that, is also interesting to consider strong equivalence for well-formed cuffs, which is one very natural structural property which is imposed by many instantiation procedures. Okay, so I end my talk. Thanks for your attention.